Simple waitress helps a disabled boy. Next day, his billionaire dad knocks at her door, and her entire life is turned upside down. She thought she was just doing the right thing, but now she's face to face with a powerful figure who isn't used to hearing the word no. Why has he come? And what shocking truth will he reveal that could change everything she knows about compassion and second chances? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Emily's shoulders ached as she wiped down the last table at Joe's all-night diner. The red vinyl booths had seen better days, but she made sure they gleamed even after a grueling double shift. Her soft humming barely carried over the drumming of rain against the windows and the quiet clinking of a coffee cup from the counter where a lone trucker sat hunched over his phone. Thunder rolled outside, making the neon open sign flicker and cast shifting pink shadows across the wet parking lot. Emily glanced at the clock. 9:47 p.m. Just a little longer until Sarah came in for the night shift. The familiar scent of coffee and grilled onions hung in the air, mixing with the musty smell of rain seeping through the old building's walls. "Need a refill?" she called to the trucker, tucking a strand of brown hair behind her ear. He shook his head without looking up. "Heading out soon. Check, please." As Emily made her way behind the counter to print his bill, a flash of movement caught her eye through the streaked windows. She squinted into the darkness, where the rain fell in heavy sheets under the parking lot lights. There, something small shifted in the shadows near a sleek black car she hadn't noticed before. Her heart jumped when she realized it was a child in a wheelchair, alone in the downpour. Without thinking, Emily grabbed her yellow raincoat from the hook by the door and rushed outside. The rain immediately soaked through her waitress uniform as she hurried across the parking lot. The boy couldn't have been more than 12, sitting in what looked like an expensive custom wheelchair. He was completely drenched, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, shoulders shaking from cold or fear, maybe both. "Hey there," Emily called softly, trying not to startle him. "Are you okay? You must be freezing." The boy looked up at her with wide eyes, his face pale in the harsh parking lot lights. His wheelchair was positioned next to what Emily now saw was a Tesla, its sleek black surface reflecting the neon signs from the diner. "I'm Emily," she said, crouching down to his level. "Why don't you come inside where it's warm? We've got hot soup and cocoa." He hesitated, glancing at the car and back to her. I'm Theo," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Nice to meet you, Theo. Here, let me help you." Emily positioned herself behind the wheelchair. "Is it okay if I push?" After a small nod from Theo, she carefully guided him toward the diner's entrance. The wheelchair moved smoothly despite its wet wheels, clearly top-of-the-line equipment. Emily noticed a small backpack hanging from one handle, also soaked through. The trucker looked up as they entered, eyebrows raised, but quickly returned to his phone. The fluorescent lights revealed just how wet and cold Theo really was. His lips had a bluish tinge, and his expensive-looking clothes were completely soaked. "First things first, let's get you warm." Emily grabbed her spare jacket from behind the counter, an old denim thing she kept for when the diner got too cold. She draped it over Theo's shoulders, noticing how he flinched slightly at the contact before relaxing into the warmth. "Where are your parents, honey?" she asked, keeping her voice gentle as she moved behind the counter to heat up some soup. Theo's fingers played with the edge of the jacket. I can't say." Emily nodded, deciding not to push just yet. "That's okay. How about some chicken noodle soup? It's homemade. Well, diner-made, but still pretty good." A ghost of a smile crossed Theo's face. "Yes, please." While the soup heated, Emily noticed how Theo's eyes darted around the diner, taking in every detail, the chrome trim on the tables, the vintage posters on the walls, the ancient jukebox in the corner. His gaze was intelligent and curious, despite his obvious exhaustion. The trucker paid his bill and left, the bell above the door chiming as another rumble of thunder shook the windows. Theo jumped at the sound, his hands gripping the wheelchair's armrests. "It's okay," Emily said softly, placing a steaming bowl of soup in front of him. "You're safe here." Theo picked up the spoon with slightly trembling fingers and took a small sip. His eyes widened slightly. Whether from the taste or the warmth, Emily couldn't tell. But she was glad to see some color returning to his cheeks. As he ate, Emily noticed tears beginning to roll down his face, mixing with the rainwater still dripping from his hair. Without drawing attention to it, she began to hum her mother's old lullaby, the same one that had comforted her through countless stormy nights as a child. The simple melody seemed to ease something in Theo's shoulders. His crying quieted, though he kept his head down, focused on the soup. Emily continued humming as she moved around the diner, keeping herself busy while staying within sight. Gradually, Theo's movements became slower, his eyelids growing heavy. The soup bowl was nearly empty when his head started to nod. Emily watched as he fought to stay awake, his small hand still curled around the soup spoon. When he finally lost the battle with sleep, slumping sideways in his wheelchair, Emily gently repositioned him so he wouldn't fall. She retrieved a couple of blankets from the storage room, clean ones they kept for emergencies, and carefully arranged them over him after moving him to one of the booths. Thunder continued to roll outside as Emily watched the sleeping boy. If no one came for him by morning, she'd have to call social services, but for now, at least he was warm, fed, and safe. She adjusted the blanket one more time, her heart aching at how young and vulnerable he looked. The storm showed no signs of letting up, rain still beating against the windows as Emily returned to her closing duties, keeping one eye on her unexpected guest. Whatever had brought Theo out alone on such a night, she was glad he'd found his way to Joe's diner. The next day, the morning sun painted streaks of gold across the diner's worn linoleum floor as Emily finished setting up for breakfast service. The storm had finally passed, leaving puddles that sparkled in the early light. Theo hadn't stirred all night, still curled up in the booth with Emily's denim jacket wrapped around his shoulders, his breathing deep and peaceful. Sarah, the night shift waitress, had raised an eyebrow when she arrived but asked no questions. She just helped Emily keep watch over their young guest through the quiet hours before dawn. Now, as Emily arranged sugar packets in their holders, the morning crowd was starting to trickle in, mostly regulars who barely glanced at the sleeping boy in the corner booth. The bell above the door suddenly jangled with such force that it made Emily jump. Two men in dark suits burst in, their presence immediately filling the small diner. They moved with practiced efficiency, scanning every corner with sharp eyes. Behind them strode a third man who made Emily's breath catch. He was tall and imposing, in an expertly tailored gray suit, his face a mask of controlled tension. Everything about him spoke of wealth and authority, from his perfectly styled dark hair to his Italian leather shoes. But it was his eyes that held Emily's attention. They were the same deep brown as Theo's, currently blazing with barely contained fear and anger. "Miles Carrington," he announced, his voice clipped and authoritative. "I'm looking for my son." Emily stepped forward, automatically positioning herself between the men and Theo's booth. "Sir, Where is he?" Miles cut her off, his knuckles white as he gripped the back of a nearby chair. "My security team tracked his chair's GPS here." "Your son is safe," Emily said firmly, meeting his intense gaze. "He's sleeping right now." The two security men started to move past her, but Miles held up his hand, stopping them. His eyes had found Theo in the booth, and something in his stern expression cracked. He took a half step forward, then stopped, staring at his son's peaceful face. He's just sleeping?" Miles asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. Emily nodded. "He came in during the storm last night. The car he was near had stopped working, I think. He was cold and wet, so I brought him inside, gave him some soup, and let him rest." Miles moved closer to the booth, his movements careful now, as if afraid to break some spell. The security men flanked him, their faces professionally blank. "Sir," one of them said quietly, "we should get Master Theo home immediately." Miles nodded sharply, seeming to remember himself. "Yes, of course. Johnson, Peters, please escort my son to the car." The security men approached the booth, but as one reached for Theo, the boy's eyes fluttered open. In an instant, his peaceful expression transformed into panic. He jerked away from the security guard's hands and grabbed Emily's arm, his fingers gripping tight enough to hurt. "No!" Theo's voice was small but determined. "I want to stay with Emily." Miles froze, his composed facade cracking further as he watched his son cling to this stranger. "Theo," he said, his tone gentler now. "We need to go home. Everyone's been worried sick about you." Emily carefully placed her free hand over Theo's. "It's okay," she said softly. "Your dad's here now." Miles stepped forward, pulling out his wallet. "I apologize for any inconvenience. Please, let me compensate you for your trouble." "No." Emily shook her head firmly. "There's no need for that. Your son needed help, so I helped him. He looked lonely, not lost." The words seemed to hit Miles like a physical blow. He stared at her, then at Theo, who was still holding on to her arm, but had relaxed slightly. "Dad," Theo said quietly, "can I stay a little longer? Emily makes good soup, and she knows nice songs, and she didn't treat me like I was broken." The last words hung in the air between them all. Miles's face softened, real pain flickering across his features before he got it under control. "Son, we need to get you home," he said, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. He moved closer, crouching down beside the booth so he was at eye level with Theo. "You scared me, running away like that. I didn't know where you were, if you were hurt." Theo's grip on Emily's arm loosened slightly. "I'm sorry, Dad. I wanted to go somewhere real, somewhere normal." Miles reached out hesitantly, then gathered his son into his arms. The movement was awkward, unpracticed, but full of careful tenderness. Theo let go of Emily's arm completely, allowing his father to lift him. "Can I come back here?" Theo asked, looking over his father's shoulder at Emily. His voice was quiet but hopeful. Miles paused, adjusting his hold on his son. Something complicated passed across his face as he looked between Theo and Emily. Finally, he shifted Theo's weight to one arm and reached into his suit jacket with his free hand. "Here," he said, extending a business card to Emily. She took it, noting the embossed lettering, "Miles Carrington, founder, Cartech Systems." The security men had already brought Theo's wheelchair around, and Miles gently settled his son into it. Emily watched as they made their way to the door. Theo's small form dwarfed by his father's tall shadow and the bulky presence of the security team. Just before they left, Emily caught one last glimpse of Theo's face as he looked back at her. There was something different in his expression now, a spark of hope that hadn't been there when he'd first arrived in the storm. The sleek black car pulled away from the diner, leaving Emily standing by the counter, holding the business card and wondering about the boy who had wanted somewhere real to go. Hours later, Emily trudged up the stairs to her small apartment, her feet aching from another double shift at the diner. The evening crowd had been particularly demanding, and all she could think about was a hot shower and her comfortable bed. But as she reached her door, something caught her eye, a cream-colored envelope propped against her welcome mat. She picked it up, noting the weight of the expensive paper and the precise handwriting that spelled out her name. Inside, she found a carefully penned note. "Dear Emily, I want to properly thank you for taking care of Theo that night. More importantly, you gave him something I haven't been able to, a sense of normalcy. He hasn't stopped talking about you or the diner. If you're willing, Theo would love to see you again. I've included a prepaid car service voucher and my personal number. Please visit at your convenience. Sincerely, Miles Carrington. Emily turned the note over in her hands, considering. A small card fell out. The voucher, she realized. Her curiosity got the better of her exhaustion, and she pulled out her phone, dialing the number before she could talk herself out of it. The phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered. Miles Carrington speaking. Hi, this is Emily. From the diner? She winced at how uncertain she sounded. I just found your note. Emily, yes. His tone warmed slightly. Thank you for calling. Would you be interested in visiting tomorrow? Theo's been asking about you. She thought about her schedule. She had the afternoon off. Tomorrow would work, actually. Excellent. I'll send a car for you at noon, if that's convenient. The next day, Emily found herself in the back of a gleaming black sedan, watching the city give way to manicured lawns and increasingly grand houses. The car finally turned into a long driveway, approaching what looked more like a modern art museum than a home. The structure was all glass and sharp angles, with perfectly maintained gardens surrounding it. The driver opened her door, and Emily stepped out, feeling underdressed in her simple sundress and cardigan. Before she could reach the front door, it swung open silently. Welcome, Emily, a disembodied female voice announced. Please proceed to the main foyer. Emily hesitated, then stepped inside. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior, and somehow even less homey. Everything was white, chrome, or glass, with screens embedded in walls and floating holographic displays showing various household metrics. The air had an artificial cleanness to it, like a hospital trying too hard to smell sterile. Emily! Theo's excited voice broke through the eerie silence. He wheeled himself around a corner, his face lit up with genuine joy. You came? Of course I did, she smiled, relieved to see something familiar in this strange environment. How are you? Better now. Want to see my room? Without waiting for an answer, he spun his chair around and led the way down a corridor. Theo's room was as high-tech as the rest of the house, but somehow even more stark. Medical monitoring devices lined one wall, their screens displaying various readings. A large interactive screen dominated another wall, currently showing educational content. Everything was perfectly organized, without a toy or book out of place. Dad says these help keep me safe, Theo explained, gesturing to the monitors. They track everything. My breathing, my heart, my muscles, even my dreams, I think. Emily's heart ached at the clinical nature of it all. That must be interesting, she said carefully. It's boring, Theo corrected, then lowered his voice. Sometimes I pretend I'm an astronaut in a space station instead. In a security room elsewhere in the house, Miles watched their interaction on multiple screens. His expression was unreadable as he observed Emily's gentle responses to Theo's enthusiasm. After a few minutes, he stood and made his way to join them. I see Theo's giving you the tour, Miles said as he entered the room. I hope you don't mind that I had to verify your arrival first. Emily turned, meeting his gaze steadily. I understand wanting to protect him. Speaking of which, Miles gestured toward the door. Shall we discuss something over lunch? The dining room was as immaculate as the rest of the house. A robot server brought out perfectly plated meals while Miles explained Theo's situation in careful, measured terms. His condition requires constant monitoring, Miles said, his fingers tapping against his water glass. But I've noticed he responds differently to you. You seem to have a way of connecting with him that his usual caregivers don't. Emily watched as Theo actually ate his lunch, unlike the other food that sat untouched on various surfaces in his room. He just needs someone to see him as Theo, not as a patient. Exactly. Miles pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. That's why I'd like to offer you a position. Temporary emotional support with a very generous compensation package. Full benefits, of course, and a car service at your disposal. Emily opened the folder, her eyes widening at the figure on the contract. It was more money than she'd make in 5 years at the diner. But something felt wrong about it all. "I'm sorry," she said, closing the folder, "but I can't accept this." Miles frowned. "The terms are negotiable if—" "It's not about the money," Emily interrupted. "This isn't something you can contract out. If you want me to visit Theo, I will, but on my own terms." "Your terms?" Miles raised an eyebrow. "No handlers, no cameras, no scripted activities." Emily gestured around at the sterile environment. "Just regular visits where Theo can be a kid, not a patient." Theo, who had been quietly listening, suddenly clapped his hands. "Yes!" "Please, Dad." Miles looked between them, surprise evident on his usually composed face. Emily could almost see him running calculations in his head, weighing risks against benefits. "That's highly irregular," he said slowly. "So is a kid who needs to run away to feel normal," Emily replied gently. Miles's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his features before he got it under control. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "All right, we can try it your way." "Really?" Theo's whole face lit up. "Really," Miles nodded. "Though I do insist on providing transportation." "That's fair," Emily smiled, standing up. "I should get going. I have a shift this evening." As one of Miles's drivers escorted her to the front door, Emily heard the whir of Theo's wheelchair behind her. She turned to see him hurrying to catch up, his father following at a more measured pace. Theo reached the door just as Emily stepped outside. He was grinning, and as she waved goodbye, he mouthed the words, "Thank you," with such genuine gratitude that it made her heart swell. The next morning dawned bright and clear as Emily walked up to the imposing gates of the Carrington estate. Her worn backpack hung from one shoulder, and she clutched a small shopping bag containing her prized animal-shaped pancake molds. The security system scanned her face, and the gates opened with a quiet hum. A middle-aged woman in a crisp uniform met her at the front door, her expression a mixture of surprise and confusion. "Miss Emily, isn't it? We weren't expecting any visitors today." The housekeeper's fingers nervously straightened her already perfect apron. "All guests are usually scheduled at least 48 hours in advance." Emily smiled warmly. "Well, sometimes the best visits aren't planned." She held up her shopping bag. "I brought something special for Theo. Is he awake?" The housekeeper blinked, clearly thrown off by Emily's casual attitude. Yes, he's just finished his morning medical checks, but no one has ever come 2 days in a row without scheduling." "Perfect timing then," Emily said, already heading toward the kitchen she'd spotted during yesterday's tour. "We can make breakfast." The kitchen was a marvel of modern technology, with sleek appliances that looked more suited to a spacecraft than a family home. Emily set her bags down on the pristine counter and began pulling out ingredients from the perfectly organized pantry. She had just located a mixing bowl when she heard the familiar whir of Theo's wheelchair. "Emily!" His voice was filled with delighted disbelief. "You're back already?" She turned to find him in the doorway, still in his pajamas, his hair slightly mussed from sleep. "Of course. I promised we'd have some fun, didn't I? How do you feel about making pancakes?" "Make them?" Theo's eyes widened. I'm not supposed to." "Everyone should know how to make pancakes," Emily declared, pulling out her pancake molds. "Look, we can make them in fun shapes, elephants, giraffes, even dinosaurs." Theo wheeled closer, curiosity overtaking his hesitation. Emily pulled a chair away from the counter to make space for his wheelchair and helped him wash his hands. She guided him through measuring flour and milk, explaining each step with patience and enthusiasm. "Now for the fun part," she said, handing him a whisk. "We mix it all together, but be careful not to—" A small splash of batter flew up, landing on Theo's nose. He froze for a moment, then burst into giggles, a sound that filled the sterile kitchen with warmth. "That's exactly what's supposed to happen," Emily laughed, dabbing at his nose with a paper towel. "The messier the cook, the better the pancakes taste. That's what my grandmother always said." They were in the middle of pouring batter into a giraffe-shaped mold when Miles appeared in the doorway. He was already dressed in an impeccable suit, his tablet in hand, but he stopped short at the sight before him. His son, with flour on his cheeks and joy in his eyes, was carefully watching the edges of a pancake bubble. "Dad!" Theo called out excitedly. "Look what we're making. Emily's teaching me how to cook." Miles stepped into the kitchen, his expression a mixture of concern and amazement. "I see that. I didn't realize you were coming today, Emily." "Sometimes spontaneity is good for the soul," Emily replied, helping Theo flip the pancake. "Want to learn too? Don't tell me the great Miles Carrington doesn't know how to make pancakes." "I don't cook," Miles admitted, adjusting his tie uncomfortably. "Dad barely eats," Theo stage whispered to Emily. "He drinks lots of coffee, though." Emily shook her head in mock disappointment. "Well, that won't do. Come on, Mr. Carrington, roll up those expensive sleeves. Everyone should know how to make at least one breakfast food." To everyone's surprise, including his own, Miles set down his tablet and did just that. Under Emily's guidance, he managed to create a somewhat lopsided elephant pancake, which Theo declared was perfectly imperfect. After breakfast, Emily pulled out her sketchbook and some colored pencils. "What should we draw today?" she asked Theo, spreading the supplies out on the living room table. Theo thought for a moment, his face serious. "Can we draw a treehouse? A really cool one, with rope bridges and secret passages." "That sounds amazing," Emily said, pulling out a fresh sheet of paper. "What color should it be?" As they drew together, Theo's imagination soared. He described hidden rooms and telescope towers, places where kids could have adventures and tell stories. Emily listened intently, adding details to their drawing based on his descriptions, without ever once suggesting that such dreams might be impossible for him. "And here," Theo pointed to a corner of their drawing, "there could be a special elevator so everyone could get up to the top, no matter what." Emily smiled, adding the elevator with careful strokes. "That's thoughtful of you. The best places are the ones everyone can enjoy together." From the hallway, Miles watched the scene unfold. He observed how Emily treated Theo's ideas with respect, how she encouraged his creativity without patronizing him. There was no trace of the pity he'd seen in so many others' eyes, no careful tiptoeing around Theo's limitations. Later that night, after Emily had left and Theo had gone to bed, Miles sat in his private office. The security footage from the day played on his screen, showing the kitchen scene from multiple angles. He paused the video on a moment when Emily was helping Theo measure ingredients, both of them laughing at some shared joke. The joy on his son's face was unmistakable, a kind of happiness Miles hadn't seen since before the accident. His finger hovered over the screen for a long moment before he pressed the power button, plunging the room into darkness. He sat there in the quiet, lost in thought. The image of his flower-covered, smiling son burned into his memory. Meanwhile, across town in her small apartment, Emily sat cross-legged on her bed, writing in her journal by lamplight. Her pencil moved quickly across the page as she described Theo's incredible spirit, how his eyes lit up when he talked about his treehouse dreams, the way he seemed to shed his careful shell when allowed to just be a kid. She paused in her writing, tapping her pencil against her chin as she thought about Miles. There had been moments today, brief cracks in his controlled facade, when she'd glimpsed something more behind those guarded eyes. Pain, perhaps, or fear. She couldn't help but wonder what he was protecting Theo from, or what he was protecting himself from. The following afternoon, clouds gathered on the horizon as Emily pulled up to the Carrington estate. The security guard recognized her now, waving her through with a small nod. Inside, she found Theo in the living room. his wheelchair facing the large window that overlooked the manicured gardens. Something was different about him today. His usual energy seemed dimmed, like a light switched to its lowest setting. "Hey there, artist," Emily called softly, setting down her bag. "Ready for another adventure?" Theo turned his wheelchair slowly, offering a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. Emily noticed immediately that his wrist was bare. The smartwatch that usually blinked with constant monitoring was missing. The absence of its soft blue glow made his arm look smaller, more vulnerable. "Is everything okay?" Emily asked, pulling up a chair beside him. She kept her voice gentle, matching his quiet mood. Theo's fingers played with the edge of his blanket, twisting the fabric into small spirals. "I was just thinking," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "About before what?" His eyes drifted back to the window. "Before everything changed. We used to go to Wilson Park every Saturday. There was this really cool playground with special swings where my wheelchair could fit." He pressed his hand against the glass. "Now Dad says it's too dangerous. Everything's too dangerous." Emily followed his gaze outside. The gardens were beautiful but sterile, more like a magazine picture than a place for a child to play. "What was your favorite thing to do at the park?" Theo's face brightened slightly at the memory. Mom knew exactly how to push the swing. Not too high, but high enough that I could feel like I was flying. His smile faded. "Dad doesn't talk about her anymore. He took down all the pictures after." Emily reached for her bag, pulling out her sketchbook and colored pencils. "Would you like to draw it? The park, the swing, any part you remember?" Theo nodded, accepting the materials with practiced care. His hands moved slowly at first, then with growing confidence as the memory took shape on paper. Emily watched as he sketched a playground, complete with specially designed equipment. In the corner, he drew two figures, a small boy in a wheelchair and a woman with long hair flowing in an invisible breeze. "That's Mom," he said softly, adding final touches to her smile. She always wore her hair down, even when it was windy. Dad used to say it was like trying to catch sunshine. After a while, Theo's energy waned, and Emily helped him get comfortable for his afternoon nap, a routine she'd learned was non-negotiable. Once he was asleep, curiosity and concern drove her to explore the quiet house. She told herself she was just trying to understand, to help somehow. The upper floor was a maze of closed doors and silent hallways. One door stood slightly ajar, Miles's private study. Emily knew she shouldn't, but Theo's sadness and all the unspoken words in this house pushed her forward. The room was dark except for the soft glow of multiple monitors. On the main screen, a folder caught her eye. Theo, Condition Overview. Her heart pounded as she moved the mouse, hesitating for just a moment before clicking. Medical terms and charts filled the screen, but certain phrases jumped out with horrible clarity. Progressive muscular deterioration, estimated 2 to 3 years before complete loss of lower body mobility, potential respiratory complications. "What are you doing?" Miles's voice cut through the silence like ice. Emily spun around to find him in the doorway, his face a mask of fury and fear. "I'm sorry," she stammered, stepping away from the computer. "I was just trying to understand." "Understand what?" Miles advanced into the room, his voice tight with controlled anger. "How to better pity him. How to feel superior about your charitable attention to the sick child." "No!" Emily stood her ground despite her racing heart. "I'm trying to understand why you're keeping him locked away from everything that makes life worth living." "You think I'm being cruel?" Miles' laugh was bitter. "You think I enjoy watching my son's world shrink. Every time he pushes himself too hard, every strain, every fall, it accelerates the condition. One bad accident could take away what little mobility he has left." Emily gestured at the screen surrounding them. So your solution is to wrap him in technology and pretend the outside world doesn't exist. You're not preparing him. You're imprisoning him. The words hit Miles like a physical blow. He gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white. You think hope fixes bones? His voice cracked slightly. You don't know what it's like to lose everything and be told to smile through it. No, I don't, Emily admitted. But I know what it's like to watch someone give up on living because they're too afraid of dying. She moved toward the door, then paused. Theo drew a picture today of his mother pushing him on a swing. He said, "You don't talk about her anymore. Maybe that's not the only memory you're trying to lock away." Miles didn't respond, his back rigid as he stared at the medical files still glowing on the screen. Emily left the study, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. As she walked out of the house, the first drops of rain began to fall, not the violent storm of their first meeting, but a gentle shower that seemed to whisper of cleansing and renewal. The next morning arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. Emily stood at the Carrington Estates front door, clutching an old, worn pop-up book to her chest. Yesterday's confrontation still echoed in her mind, but she squared her shoulders and rang the bell. She had also brought a small note, carefully folded and addressed to Theo. "Let's build something today." The housekeeper answered, surprise evident on her face. "Miss Emily, we weren't expecting—" "I know," Emily said softly but firmly. "But I'm here for Theo." From the second-floor balcony overlooking the foyer, Miles watched Emily's arrival. His face remained unreadable, but he made no move to stop her as she made her way to Theo's room. Something had shifted after yesterday's confrontation, though neither of them could quite name what it was. Theo's face lit up when Emily entered, the tension from yesterday forgotten in the way only children can manage. "You came back," he exclaimed, wheeling himself toward her. "Of course I did," Emily smiled, handing him the note. She watched as his eyes scanned the words, a smile spreading across his face. "Really? What are we going to build?" Theo asked, excitement making his words tumble out faster. Emily pulled out the pop-up book from her bag. "Well, I was thinking about that treehouse you drew the other day." She opened the book to reveal intricate paper structures that sprang to life with each turn of the page. "What if we made a smaller version? Something for your action figures?" Theo's eyes widened with possibility. "Can we do it outside?" he asked, then quickly added, "If Dad says it's okay." From his position on the balcony, Miles had been listening. Instead of speaking through the house's intercom system as usual, he made his way down to Theo's room. "The weather's good today," he said from the doorway, causing both Emily and Theo to turn in surprise. "Just stay where I can see you." The backyard was a pristine expanse of manicured lawn, but Emily and Theo soon changed that. They gathered supplies, cardboard boxes from the recycling, craft supplies from Theo's art cabinet, and small branches that had fallen from the estate's trees. Emily spread an old blanket on the grass, helping Theo transfer from his wheelchair to sit comfortably on the ground. "First, we need to design it," Emily explained, sketching a quick outline. "What kind of treehouse should it be?" "A castle," Theo declared, "with a drawbridge for the action figures." They worked together, cutting cardboard and arranging twigs. Theo's hands moved carefully but confidently as he helped design tiny furniture from craft supplies. Emily noticed Miles watching from the patio, his usual stern expression softening as he observed their progress. To both Emily and Theo's surprise, Miles eventually made his way over to them. He stood awkwardly for a moment before rolling up the sleeves of his expensive dress shirt. "That support beam needs reinforcing," he said quietly, pointing to a wobbly section of their creation. Theo beamed as his father knelt down beside them, careful not to get his trousers dirty, but clearly making an effort. Emily handed him some craft supplies, their fingers brushing briefly. The tension from yesterday's argument still lingered, but it was different now, more like a bridge under construction than a wall. As they worked, conversations flowed naturally. Theo asked about the tree houses they had known as children. Emily shared stories about the makeshift fort she'd built with her sister using old sheets and kitchen chairs. Miles, surprisingly, spoke of a simple platform his father had helped him build in their backyard oak tree. "I fell out of it twice," he admitted, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "My mother was furious, but Dad just helped me build a better railing." The afternoon sun cast long shadows as they worked, and the conversation gradually turned more serious. Emily noticed how Miles' hands would sometimes pause in their work, his eyes distant. "Sarah, Theo's mother, she loved projects like this," Miles said suddenly, his voice soft. "She was always creating something with him. She believed in making memories, not just existing." Theo's hands stilled on the tiny drawbridge he was painting. Emily saw tears gathering in his eyes, but she didn't move to wipe them away. Sometimes tears needed to fall. "The day of the accident," Miles continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were coming back from a specialist appointment. The roads were wet. The other driver, he swallowed hard. When the emergency services arrived, they said we had to choose. Sarah's injuries. They needed a specialist trauma center. But Theo's condition meant he needed immediate care at the children's hospital. They were in opposite directions." Emily's heart ached as she watched Miles struggle with the words. Above them, through the window of his room, Theo listened silently, tears rolling down his cheeks, not from pain or fear, but from finally understanding the weight his father had carried alone. "Sarah made the choice," Miles said. "She always put Theo first, always. But I'm the one who had to tell them which hospital to go to. I'm the one who—" His voice broke. "You're the one who honored her choice," Emily finished gently. "You're the one who kept your promise to her." The miniature treehouse stood finished between them, a small testament to what could be built from broken pieces. As the sun began to set, they helped Theo back inside. Emily noticed how Miles's hand lingered on his son's shoulder, how Theo leaned into the touch instead of away from it. Later that evening, Emily sat in Theo's room, reading from the pop-up book. Each page revealed new worlds, new possibilities, and Theo's eyes grew heavy as he listened. Miles stood in the doorway, watching the scene with an expression Emily had never seen before, something like peace mixed with longing. When Theo finally drifted off to sleep, Emily carefully closed the book and stood to leave. Miles stepped aside to let her pass, but then reached out, gently catching her arm. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not treating me like the villain." Emily looked up at him, seeing not the stern businessman or the overprotective father, but simply a man trying to navigate an impossible path. "Then stop writing yourself like one." A few days later, Emily arrived at the Carrington estate with a simple spiral notebook tucked under her arm. The morning sun painted the mansion's windows in golden light, making the usually imposing structure seem almost welcoming. She found Theo in the garden, carefully tending to a small herb patch they'd started together earlier that week. "I brought something special today," Emily announced, holding up the notebook. Its blue cover was plain, but she decorated it with silver star stickers that caught the light. "This is going to be Theo's awesome adventure list." Theo looked up from his basil plant, curiosity brightening his eyes. "What's that?" "It's a wish list," Emily explained, settling down on the garden bench beside his wheelchair. "But not the kind you save for someday. This is for things we're going to do soon." "Really soon?" Theo asked, his voice carrying a mix of hope and skepticism that broke Emily's heart a little. "Really soon," she confirmed, opening the notebook to its first clean page. She pulled out a set of colorful markers from her bag. "What's something you've always wanted to do?" Theo's face scrunched up in thought. After a moment, he reached for a purple marker. "I want to see real stars," he said quietly. "Not just the ones on my ceiling." Emily nodded encouragingly as he carefully wrote the words. "That's perfect. What else? Roast marshmallows, Theo added, growing more animated. Mom used to talk about camping, but we never... He trailed off, then continued writing with determination. Miles appeared in the garden doorway, watching silently as his son filled the page with dreams. Ride a horse, followed by make a friend who's not a therapist, which made Emily chuckle. The last one, Theo wrote more slowly. Tell a story to someone who listens. Those are wonderful ideas, Emily said, noting how Miles had moved closer, trying to appear casual as he peered at the list. You know what would be perfect for checking off all these things? Theo shook his head, marker poised above the paper. A road trip, Emily suggested, watching Miles from the corner of her eye. 1 week, just us. No staff, no tech. The change in Miles's posture was immediate. His shoulders tensed, and Emily could practically see the objections forming. But before he could voice them, Theo's face lit up with such pure joy that the words seemed to die in Miles's throat. Really? Theo asked, looking between Emily and his father. Could we really? Miles ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, mussing it slightly. Theo, your condition requires careful monitoring. We need to consider... Dad, Theo interrupted, his voice carrying a strength that surprised them all. Please, I'm careful. I know my limits. And Emily will be there. And you too. Please. Emily watched the internal struggle play out across Miles's face. His need for control warred with his desire to see his son happy. Finally, he let out a long breath. With conditions, he said firmly. I'll drive. Emily plans the route since this was her idea. And Theo... He smiled slightly. Theo leads the adventure. The joy that exploded across Theo's face was worth every moment of tension. He immediately began adding more items to his list, his handwriting growing messier with excitement. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Emily researched wheelchair-accessible campgrounds and attractions, marking them on a large paper map rather than relying on GPS. Miles surprised them both by tracking down an RV that had been modified for accessibility, complete with a lift and wider passages. The morning of their departure arrived bright and clear. Emily showed up early, her old sketch pad and art supplies packed alongside practical necessities. She found Miles in the garage, carefully examining an old Polaroid camera. It was Sarah's, he explained quietly, testing the shutter. She always said digital photos were too perfect. She liked the way Polaroids captured real moments, mistakes and all. Theo wheeled himself into the garage, a backpack filled with books and art supplies balanced on his lap. His eyes widened at the sight of the camera. Is that Mom's? Miles nodded, showing him how to hold it. Want to take our first trip photo? They spent the next hour loading the RV, which was less luxurious than Emily had expected given Miles's usual standards. It was clean and well-maintained, but clearly had character. Worn seats, a slightly squeaky door, curtains that had seen better days. It felt more like a home than the mansion ever had. Theo insisted on taping his adventure list to the RV's small refrigerator, right where everyone could see it. Emily watched as Miles read it again, his finger lingering on the last item. Tell a story to someone who listens. The sun was just cresting over the trees when they finally piled into the RV. Miles sat behind the wheel, looking both terrified and determined in his casual clothes, jeans and a soft blue sweater that Emily had never seen him wear before. She settled into the passenger seat with her map spread across her lap, while Theo secured his wheelchair in the specially designed space behind them. Everyone ready? Miles asked, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Ready? Theo called out, already holding his mother's camera. Emily caught Miles' eye and smiled encouragingly. Ready when you are. The RV's engine rumbled to life, and Miles carefully guided it down the long driveway. Theo snapped pictures as they went, the mansion growing smaller behind them, Emily consulting her paper map, his father's unusually relaxed profile against the morning light streaming through the windshield. The last photo he took captured all three of them reflected in the RV's large side mirror. Miles focusing on the road ahead, Emily pointing at something on her map, and Theo himself grinning between them as the sun spilled over the windshield, turning everything to gold. The Polaroid slid out with a familiar whir, slowly revealing a moment that felt like the beginning of something new. The second day of their road trip dawned crisp and clear. They had found a secluded campsite nestled against a forest glade where tall pines swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. Theo sat in his wheelchair near the fire pit, clutching a bag of marshmallows like it was treasure, his eyes bright with anticipation. Emily knelt by the fire pit, carefully arranging kindling and smaller sticks in a pyramid shape. She'd learned this from her father years ago, and her hands moved with practiced confidence. "The secret," she explained to Theo, "is to build from small to big, just like telling a story." A few feet away, Miles stood surrounded by tent poles and canvas, his usually impeccable appearance somewhat disheveled. He held up two metal poles with a bewildered expression. "These instructions are clearly incorrect," he muttered, trying to connect pieces that obviously didn't go together. Theo couldn't contain his laughter as he watched his father struggle. "Dad, I think that one goes in the front," he said between giggles. "I designed complex operating systems," Miles grumbled, accidentally dropping a pole. "This should not be this difficult." Emily glanced up from her now crackling fire, hiding her own smile. "Maybe if you tried voice commands?" she suggested innocently. This sent Theo into another fit of laughter, so hard he nearly dropped his marshmallows. Miles shot Emily a look that tried to be stern, but couldn't quite manage it, his lips twitching at the corners. As the sun began to set, they finally had their camp set up, the tent standing mostly straight, if a bit lopsided, and the fire burning steadily. Theo speared his first marshmallow with intense concentration, holding it carefully over the flames as Emily had shown him. "Not too close," she guided gently. "You want it golden, not charred." Miles sat beside his son, watching the process with fascination. He'd declined a marshmallow for himself, but his eyes never left Theo's face, drinking in every expression of joy. When night fell completely, Emily helped Theo transfer from his chair onto a specially padded reclining chair they'd brought for stargazing. The sky above them was a vast canvas of darkness pierced by countless pinpoints of light, more stars than Theo had ever seen in his life. "Wow," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "They're so bright." Emily pointed upward, tracing patterns with her finger. "See those three bright stars in a row? That's Orion's belt. And if you look carefully, you can see the rest of him, the hunter in the sky." "Tell me about him?" Theo asked, his eyes wide with wonder. As Emily wove tales of ancient heroes and mythical beasts, Theo's questions began to shift, becoming more personal. "Do you think Mom can see these stars too?" he asked suddenly, his voice small in the darkness. Miles, who had been sitting silently nearby, drew in a sharp breath. But before he could deflect or change the subject as he usually did, Theo continued. "I'm scared sometimes," he admitted. "Not just about, but that I'll forget her, what she looked like when she laughed, how she smelled like vanilla and paint." Emily remained quiet, giving Theo space to speak. She could see Miles in her peripheral vision, his jaw tight, but his eyes soft with unshed tears. "I dream about the accident sometimes," Theo said. "But other times, I dream about before. When we used to go to the park, and Mom would push me on the swings, and Dad would actually wear jeans and throw a baseball around." Miles moved closer, placing his hand on Theo's shoulder. "I dream about her too, buddy," he said softly. "Every night." They stayed like that for a long time, sharing stories and pointing out constellations, until Theo's eyes began to droop. Miles carefully carried him to his specially adapted sleeping area in the tent. tucking him in with gentle movements that belied his strength. When he returned to the fire, Emily was still sitting there, staring up at the stars. Miles settled beside her, closer than he normally would have allowed himself. "I haven't slept through the night since it happened," he confessed, his voice rough. "I keep thinking, if I'd just been faster, if I'd made a different choice." Emily turned to face him, her expression soft in the firelight. "You made the only choice you could," she said quietly. "You saved your son." "But at what cost?" His words were barely audible. "I see him fading, Emily. The doctors say his condition is progressing faster than they expected, and He broke off, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to help him live while I'm so terrified of him dying." Without thinking, Emily reached out and took his hand. Miles stiffened for a moment, then slowly relaxed, his fingers intertwining with hers. They sat in silence, the weight of their joined hands saying more than words could. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across their faces. Emily could feel Miles's breath, steady and warm in the cool night air. He turned slightly, and their eyes met. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The space between them crackled with unspoken possibilities, but neither moved to close it. Instead, they remained there, hands clasped, shoulders touching, as the fire slowly died down to embers. Eventually, their heads drifted together, Emily's cheek resting against Miles's shoulder, his head leaning gently against hers. They fell asleep like that, under the vast canopy of stars. Morning light filtered through the trees when Emily woke to an unusual smell, something between burning and sweetness. She emerged from her sleeping bag to find Miles standing over the camping stove, spatula in hand, attempting to flip what might have once been pancakes. Theo sat nearby in his chair, trying to guide his father through the process. "Dad, you have to wait for the bubbles before you flip it." "There are bubbles," Miles protested, pointing at the charred edge of a misshapen pancake. "Those are burn marks," Theo laughed, shaking his head. "Here, let me show you again." Emily watched silently as Theo demonstrated the proper technique, Miles following his son's instructions with the same intensity he usually reserved for business meetings. Their laughter mingled with the morning birdsong, creating a melody that made Emily's heart swell. Tears welled up in her eyes as she observed this simple moment, not from sadness, but from something that felt like pure joy. It was the sight of Miles in his rumpled clothes, proudly holding up a slightly less burnt pancake for Theo's inspection. It was Theo's patient guidance and delighted giggles. It was the way the morning sun caught them both, father and son, finally looking like a family again. The winding dirt road led them to Sweet Sage Ranch, where wooden fences stretched across rolling hills under the Colorado sun. As their RV pulled up to the main building, a weathered barn-style structure with cheerful window boxes full of wildflowers, they could see horses grazing peacefully in nearby paddocks. Theo pressed his face against the window, his eyes wide with excitement. "Look at all the horses," he exclaimed, his breath fogging the glass. A woman with sun-weathered skin and laugh lines around her eyes came out to greet them. "Welcome to Sweet Sage." "I'm Sarah," she called out warmly, "and this is my daughter, June." Behind her, a small figure in a wheelchair rolled forward with impressive speed. The girl had bright red hair, tied in messy pigtails, and a wide, mischievous grin. She wore cowboy boots that dangled from her chair's footrests and a shirt covered in cartoon horses. "Hi," June announced boldly. "You must be Theo. Mom said you were coming. Want to see my favorite pony?" Theo looked up at his father, seeking permission. Miles nodded, trying to hide his surprise at June's directness. Emily helped Theo transfer to his chair, and soon the two children were heading toward the stables, June leading the way with confident turns of her wheels. "She's quite something," Emily remarked, watching them go. Sarah smiled softly. "That she is. Come on in. We'll get you folks settled. The ranch house was cozy and lived in, with worn leather furniture and walls covered in horse photos and children's artwork. Through the window, they could hear June's clear voice explaining everything to Theo about the horses. "This is Buttercup," June was saying. "She's super gentle and smart. She knows exactly how to walk smooth for riders like us." Soon, both children were being helped onto specially adapted saddles. June showed Theo how to hold himself, demonstrating the best way to balance despite their physical limitations. Her instructions were peppered with jokes that had Theo laughing so hard he nearly lost his grip. "Why don't horses wear shoes?" June asked as they walked their ponies side by side. "Because they're wearing knackers." Theo groaned at the pun, but couldn't stop grinning. Emily noticed he was sitting straighter than usual, mimicking June's confident posture. While the children rode, Sarah invited Emily and Miles to join her on a shaded bench. Her expression grew serious as she watched her daughter. "June was diagnosed when she was 3, she said quietly. "The doctors gave us 5 years. She's 8 now, and every day is a gift." She paused, meeting Miles's eyes. "We're in hospice care now, but June insisted on staying at the ranch. She says the horses need her." Miles's face paled. Emily reached for his hand instinctively, and this time he gripped back tightly. "She's so full of life," Emily whispered, watching June demonstrate a proper royal wave to Theo. "That's her choice," Sarah explained. "She says if she can't have quantity of time, she'll have quality instead. She's taught me more about living than anyone else ever has." That evening, after a dinner of ranch-style chili, the children sat together on the wraparound porch. June had brought out her collection of favorite books, and they were trading stories back and forth. "Sometimes," Theo admitted quietly, "I get really scared about what happens next. With everything, you know." June nodded, understanding immediately. "Then make now louder," she said simply. "That's what I do. When the scary thoughts get too noisy, I just make right now even noisier. Like, look at the sunset. It's so orange it's practically shouting at us. And listen to those crickets. They're having a whole concert." Theo considered this, then reached for his backpack. He pulled out a notebook and some colored pencils Emily had packed. "Will you help me with something?" he asked June. "I want to write a story." "What kind of story?" June leaned forward, interested. "It's called The Boy Who Could Fly While Sitting Still," Theo explained. "It's about a kid who can't walk, but he can do something amazing instead." June's eyes lit up. "Can I be your first reader?" Emily, who had been sketching nearby, moved closer. "Would you like some illustrations to go with your story?" she offered. Theo nodded enthusiastically, and soon all three were absorbed in the creative process. June suggested plot points while Theo wrote, and Emily brought their ideas to life with quick, colorful sketches. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, Miles and Emily found themselves sitting together on the other end of the porch. They watched the children working on the story, their heads bent together in concentration. "I've been so focused on protecting him," Miles said softly, "that I forgot to teach him how to live." His voice was raw with emotion. "All this time, I thought being a good father meant controlling everything, preventing any possible pain. But watching him today, with June..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "You're learning," Emily said gently. "We all are." Miles turned to look at her, his eyes full of vulnerability she'd never seen before. "Thank you," he whispered, "for showing me there's another way, for helping me learn to be the father he needs." The setting sun painted everything in soft gold light. Emily could see every detail of Miles's face, the worry lines around his eyes, the softness in his expression, the hope replacing his usual guard. Slowly, inevitably, they drew closer to each other. When their lips met, it was gentle and sweet, full of unspoken understanding and newfound trust. It was a kiss that spoke of shared journeys and opened hearts, of learning to love despite fear. Inside, Theo proudly showed June the first page of his story. His eyes were bright with excitement as she read the opening lines, taking in Emily's whimsical illustrations of a boy soaring through clouds while seated in a golden chair. "This," June declared with authority, "is going to be awesome." Theo's grin stretched from ear to ear as he began to read aloud, his voice strong and clear in the gathering dusk. Days later, the Carrington estate had transformed. Twinkling lights hung from every tree in the sprawling garden, creating a magical canopy that sparkled against the darkening sky. Soft music drifted through the air, mixing with the sound of laughter and conversation. The once sterile smart home now hummed with life and warmth. Children from Sweet Sage Ranch explored the garden in wheelchairs and with walkers, their faces lit up with joy as they discovered the cotton candy machine and the petting zoo Miles had arranged. Sarah, June's mother, watched from a comfortable chair, tears occasionally sliding down her cheeks as she observed her daughter directing other kids like a tiny queen. Emily adjusted a string of lights near the makeshift stage they'd set up for Theo's reading. She wore a simple blue sundress that caught the breeze, her hair loose around her shoulders. As she worked, she couldn't help but smile at how different everything felt. The security cameras were turned off, the mechanical voice controls silent. Instead, real voices filled the air with genuine emotion. Miles moved through the crowd, looking both uncomfortable and pleased in casual clothes, a sight that still surprised Emily. He'd traded his usual suit for khakis and a light blue button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Every few minutes, his eyes would find Emily or Theo, as if making sure they were still there, still real. "Ready for the big moment?" Emily asked Theo, who sat in his chair clutching his handwritten story, now bound in a proper cover that June had helped decorate with glitter and drawings. "I think so," Theo replied, his voice shaky but excited. "June says I should pretend everyone's wearing funny hats if I get nervous." June rolled up beside him, her red hair adorned with a flower crown. "Or imagine them all as horses," she suggested with a giggle. "That's what I do when I have to take yucky medicine." The crowd began gathering around the stage area as Miles gently tapped a spoon against his glass. "Everyone," he called out, his voice carrying across the garden. "My son has something he'd like to share with you all." Emily helped Theo position himself near the microphone while June stayed close by, giving him an encouraging thumbs up. The evening light caught the silver of Theo's wheelchair, making it look almost magical against the backdrop of twinkling lights. "This is a story called The Boy Who Could Fly While Sitting Still," Theo began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "It's about a boy named Tommy who couldn't walk, but he could do something amazing instead." As Theo read, Emily's illustrations were displayed on a large screen behind him. Each page brought gasps and smiles from the audience, the detailed drawings showing Tommy's journey from feeling trapped to discovering his ability to soar through dreams and imagination. June occasionally added sound effects, making whooshing noises for the flying scenes that had everyone chuckling. When Theo finished, the garden erupted in applause. June clapped the loudest, nearly bouncing out of her chair with enthusiasm. Miles stood at the back, his eyes suspiciously bright as he watched his son beam with pride. As people mingled afterward, a woman in a crisp blazer approached Emily. "Those illustrations were remarkable," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Patricia Wells from Starlight Publishing. We'd love to discuss working with you on more children's books." Emily blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, what? But I never submitted anything to publishers." Patricia looked confused. "Oh, we received the manuscript and portfolio last week. Mr. Carrington sent them over. He was quite persuasive about your talent." Emily's heart dropped. She turned to find Miles watching them, a hopeful smile on his face. The familiar feeling of control, of choices being made for her, crept up her spine. Excusing herself from Patricia, Emily walked straight to Miles. "You submitted my work without telling me?" Her voice was low but intense. "I thought I wanted to help," Miles said, his smile fading. "Your talent deserves recognition." "That wasn't your decision to make." Emily wrapped her arms around herself, creating a barrier between them. "You keep trying to fix things with money and influence. But love isn't a transaction, Miles. You took away my choice. Again." "Emily, I didn't mean to..." "To what?" "Control the situation. Make everything perfect according to your plan." She shook her head, tears threatening. "You still don't understand. Real love means trusting someone enough to let them make their own choices, even if those choices aren't what you would choose for them." The lights suddenly felt too bright, the music too loud. Emily could see Theo watching them from across the garden, his expression worried. June held his hand, both children sensing the tension. "I need to go," Emily said quietly, turning away from Miles's stricken face. She grabbed her bag from a nearby chair, her movements quick and decisive. "Emily, please," Miles called after her, his voice carrying across the garden. "Let me explain." But Emily kept walking, her steps steady even as tears began to fall. She passed through the garden gate, leaving behind the twinkling lights and the sound of children's laughter. In his room later that night, Theo sat in the darkness, listening to the last party guests leave. He could hear his father pacing in the hallway, probably on the phone trying to reach Emily. Rolling his chair to his bed, Theo reached underneath and pulled out something he'd hidden there weeks ago, his old leg braces. He held them in his lap, running his fingers over the familiar straps and metal supports. Through his window, he could see the garden lights still twinkling, reminding him of the stars they'd seen on their camping trip. "Time to make now louder," he whispered, echoing June's words as he stared out at the night sky. The words hung in the quiet room, a small act of bravery in the darkness. The morning sun stretched across the Carrington estate's manicured lawn. Inside, automated systems hummed through empty rooms. Miles walked down the hallway to Theo's bedroom, footsteps echoing. "Theo?" He knocked. No answer. He opened the door to find the bed empty, perfectly made. His heart raced as he checked the bathroom, playroom, and kitchen, all empty. Trembling, he checked security footage. At 5:43 a.m., Theo had wheeled himself down the hallway, taken the service elevator to the garage, and exited through a side door. Miles noticed a note on Theo's desk. "Going to find the person who believed in me first." He spotted the empty space where the braces had been hidden. "Emily," he whispered, rushing to his car. At the bustling diner, Miles spotted Theo's wheelchair beside a corner booth. Theo sat talking with Emily, wearing his braces under his jeans. She listened with concern and pride. Miles entered as Theo gripped the table to stand. The diner fell silent. Emily moved to help, but Theo refused. "I can do it," he said. Slowly, Theo rose and took trembling steps. Customers watched in amazement. When he reached Emily, he whispered. Dad finally smiled. Miles stood transfixed, tearful at seeing his son walk, despite all medical predictions. He pulled out the polished soup spoon tied with a red ribbon and placed it between them. "I didn't come to fix anything," Miles said. "I came to ask if you'll help me keep building what we started." Emily looked at the spoon, Theo's beaming face, and Miles, tears catching the sunlight. That evening, they sat on the diner's transformed rooftop under strings of lights. Emily leaned against Miles while Theo sat between them, clutching the soup spoon. Stars appeared overhead as the city lights twinkled below. Through the diner's window, they could see the booth where their story began. Theo nestled between them, his braces gleaming in the light, while Emily's hand intertwined with Miles's beneath their shared blanket. If you enjoyed the story of Miles and Emily, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.